and the platforms and as platforms in these countries to use this data, to know the status of land governance in these countries and in their regions, and to advocate for continuous land reform and effective change for all. Thirdly, the importance of its work with regards democratizing data on land. What Landwatch Asia did is also show how an organization like Landwatch Asia, or organizations part of the ILC network, can contribute to democratizing land and democratizing land data in particular. It shows how various types of data and data sources can contribute to monitoring the SDG advancement, for example, my first point, or land governance overall, my second point. It's important as it gives an opportunity for different sources of data. It gives an opportunities for all to convey a voice on the broad topics of land governance. It allows all to participate, to generate, and to use the data on land, SDGs, and land governance. These 3 points are all very important for ILC. They're all complementary. Data is now uptaken as strategic objective number 2 in ILC, and ILC will continue to invest in data for all so that we can empower our members to engage in evidence-based decision-making, in accountability activities, and in advocacy regarding land and land governance. This data needs to empower our members and change the power balances with regarding decision-making processes on land. And it is by monitoring the government commitments to the SDGs, by monitoring land governance, and by democratizing data, precisely as Landwatch Asia has done in their work and in this report, that we can do so. I wish Landwatch Asia all the best with this panel, and I look forward to the outcomes for more action on land, land data, and land governance. All the best. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much to Sir Ward for providing his opening remarks, and apologies for the technical glitches. You know how it is with the internet in Asia, but let's all hope that our internet connections push through for the rest of the day. Now, not wasting any time, let's continue on with the program. Next, let us hear about the rationale and framework of the 2020 CSO reports on SDG 1.4.2. May I call to the stage Don Marquez from Angok.
Thank you, Denise, and good morning to everyone. So I'll give a quick overview and the framework that the working group have used in terms of coming up with the 2020 CSO report on SDG 1.4. As we all know, in 2015, countries around the world adopted the SDGs as a universal call to end poverty, protect the planet, and ensure peace and prosperity for all by 2030. And in particular, the goal for SDG goal number 1 is to end poverty by 2030. They ensure that all men and women, in particular the poor and vulnerable, have equal rights to economic resources, as well as access to basic services, ownership and control over land and other forms of property, inheritance, and natural resources. A particular indicator to measure this goal is that the proportion of total adult population with senior tenure rights to land, with legally recognized documentation, and who perceive their rights to land as secure by sex and by type of tenure. Why is it important to look on SDG indicator 1.4.2? First, land rights is now back at the global agenda, whereas before, land issues are being discussed at the local level or at the national level, where they are seen more as a topic by the sovereign states. Second, land issues are linked to national and global issues, to migration, to internally displaced persons and refugees, the impact of the environmental degradation and climate change due to land use and tenure systems, the growing land and resource conflicts, issues of peace that were mentioned in the opening statements of this Asian Land Forum. And third, and more fundamental, is that land rights is now being seen as a central strategy and a global commitment in ending poverty. So what is happening now at the global level, though, is that the UN Habitat and the World Bank as the custodian agencies for indicator 1.4.2, and they are tasked to develop the methodology for monitoring such indicator. In the process of refining such indicator and methodology, the national statistical systems take the lead in the collection of data and in reporting the progress of SDGs. At the global level, SDG target 1.4.2 is categorized as tier 2, meaning that there are internationally recognized methodologies to produce the information for 1.4, and that UN member countries do not regularly produce such data. The objective is that we make 1.4.2 as tier 1, so that all countries will be using a uniform methodology in reporting such indicator. So why did we undertake the 2020 Cso report on 1.4, SDG 1, Goal 1.4? First, we want to contribute to sustain the reporting processes of government on the Sustainable Development Goals with emphasis on land-related targets. So we're not looking at the entire SDGs, but focusing on land-related targets, and in particular, 1.4.2 indicator. Through this process of preparing reports, we hope to provide inputs to the voluntary natural reviews and SDG country reports that our respective governments will be preparing, and at the same time, pursue the policy work of civil society organizations on land rights by optimizing the space that SDGs provide for dialogue with various stakeholders in the land sector. So there are two major points that we want to look in terms of the SDG 1.4.2 indicator. One, on data availability. So we look at, is data on security of tenure of rights to land available? Second, is the data based on legally recognized documentation? And third, whether data include people's perception on security of tenure. So that's on the availability. The second aspect we look is on quality. So whether the data that is produced by government includes slums and informal settlements, whether it includes collective and communal land rights, whether data are disaggregated by sex and type of tenure, or by land and income group. So what did the methodology that the working group, Landwatch Asia Land Monitoring Working Group adopted? First, we had basically desk reviews. We updated our previous scoping studies on the national statistical offices on their readiness to measure and report the SDG indicator 1.4.2. There were key informant interviews with some government agencies and national statistical offices, but most of them are online given the COVID-19 pandemic. In terms of our overall process, we started with the regional planning last year, and then the 7 country reports in Bangladesh, Cambodia, India, Indonesia, Kyrgyz Republic, Nepal, and the Philippines started data gathering and have some online consultations with different organizations. For Bangladesh, it's the Association for Land Reform and Development who took the lead role. We have Star Kampuchea for Cambodia, the Foundation for Ecological Security for India, Binadesa for Indonesia, the National Union of Water Users Association of Kyrgyz Republic, and the Kyrgyz Association of Forest and Land Users. And then we have the Community Self-Reliance Center for Nepal, And for the Philippines, we have the People's Campaign for Agrarian Reform, the Philippine Association for Intercultural Development, the NGOs for Fisheries Reform in Anglo. So after the country gathering, there were in-country validation workshops and dialogue with respective government focal agencies for SDGs. Then we are right here in terms of presenting the highlights of the country studies, and then we'll have a formal launch of the publication, hopefully by the first quarter of 2022. So I'll stop there, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Don, for providing that overview. To those of us just joining, just a reminder, we are also live streaming on YouTube. So if you click on the upper left side of your Zoom screen, you will be able to look at the link of the live stream and share it on your respective social media pages. And also we have live translation in Viet, Thai, Bahasa, Khmer, and we also have sign language interpretation. Now we will be heading on to the meat of this session, which will be the country reports. The country reports will be divided into two parts. We first have the Southeast Asia plus Central Asia panel, then Q&A, and then we'll have the South Asia panel, Q&A, and then we'll have a general discussion, and we will hear from selected reactors before we head on to the closing, the next steps, and our lunch break. So without further ado, let's start with the country reports. First will be the South Asia plus Central Asia panel. So we will hear from speakers from the Philippines, Cambodia, and Kyrgyzstan. The speakers are Jose Ignatius Pagsanghan from the Philippines, Neksarin from Cambodia, and Tulos Bostanbayev from Kyrgyzstan. To the speakers, you have 7 minutes each, and you may share your own screens, or if you wish, you may ask us to share your presentations for you, but please stick with the time, and I will be playing a chime when your time is, when you have 1 minute left. So the chime sounds like this. I hope everyone can hear that. So you will hear that when it's 1 minute left. So that means you should wrap up. Now, let's start. Let's go ahead. May I call on Sir Joel to start with the Philippine presentation.
Thank you. Thank you, Denise. Good day to everyone. I think our presentation is on screen. So this is the report of the Philippines, and these are the organizations that were already mentioned by Don who are involved in the study. Next, please. Okay, so regarding the country's methodology of measuring and reporting SDG indicator 1.4.2, the Philippines uses a proxy indicator as described in the slide. Basically, it asks respondents whether they rent or own their own house, whether they rent or own the lot on which the house is situated, whether they're staying rent-free with the consent of the owner, etc., etc. It's a rather complex and cumbersome indicator. If you use the 2019 data with the above indicator, you have 96.4% of the population having secure tenure, which is really quite unrealistic. Now, some of our major comments regarding this indicator is, number one, it is prone to overstatement. This means that this is usually asked through a survey. The respondent will ask the surveyor will ask the respondent, do you own your own house? And the tendency is for the respondent to say yes, because previously in the Philippines, census data has been used to evict people who don't have secure tenure. So people will tend to say, yes, I own this house, even though they actually don't. And that the interviewer does not ask for legal verification. Can you show me the title of your land or your house? So there is no verification. Number two, the definition does not includes rent or lease, which we know is not secure tenure. And lastly, the definition does not include the various dimensions of tenure. For instance, it does not include collective tenure for indigenous people and fisher folk. It does not include fishing grounds or agricultural land. Next. So many problems regarding this indicator. Now, the official data available on SDG indicator 1.4.2 is presented here. For for agrarian reform, we'd like to note that 90% of the total land area has already been distributed. However, it has taken 30 years to complete agrarian reform in the Philippines. The number of CATIs is shown here also. However, of the 247 CATIs, these are the ancestral domain titles. Only 54 CATIs are registered with the Land Registration Authority, which is what actually formalizes it and institutionalizes it in the Philippine system. For small fishers, the number of registered boats and registered gears are mentioned here. Registration provides fisher folk with preferential rights to use the 15 kilometers of water from the coast, which is supposed to be protected for communal fishing. Next. Okay, on gender disaggregation, this is done by several government agencies for specific sectors. So Department of Agrarian Reform for agrarian reform sector, Department of Agriculture, etc. Now, it's not applied for all data sets of the government and not available in all agencies. So it's very uneven. On the perception of security of tenure, there is currently no measurement for that. Next. Okay. On legally recognized documentation, data on land titles for farmers and IPs and the registration of fisher folk are available at the national level. However, you have unavailable, outdated, or incomplete data on the coverage of agrarian reform and other services given to farmers, support services, IPs, fisher folk, land conversion, and land conflicts. So all of these, the data is very unreliable and sometimes unavailable. There's no data on the scope of potential beneficiaries, no registry of farmers eligible for land distribution, no data on all fisher folk, no census of IPs. There's also no data on overlapping claims. In the Philippines, you have very disorganized implementation of the land resource tenure laws. Ancestral domain, for instance, some ancestral domains overlap with land reform, and there are conflicting claims among different beneficiaries. So there's also inconsistent data among the different land agencies, and so land agencies including the Department of Agrarian Reform, Department of Environment and Natural Resources, National Commission on Indigenous Peoples, etc., and also among the different levels of government, the municipal, provincial, and national levels of government. So also consolidated data is also not available. Now, on gender disaggregation, as mentioned earlier, there's inconsistent application and gathering among agencies. So some collect it, some do not. There are broad differences on the level of detail and the level of accuracy and level of consistency that they do data aggregation on sex. And then on perception of security, the tenure security, as we said, we have no measure of that. But it is very important because, as we know, tenure security includes many dimensions, including land and resource conflicts. If there are conflicts in the land, obviously you're not feeling secure that you will stay there securely. If there are overlapping claims, other claimants, other groups, peasants, indigenous peoples claiming the same land, you have a problem. Impact of climate change. Climate change may erode the land that you are currently living on, or eliminate it through flooding. So, and of course, issues on peace and order. If there are military operations, clashes between insurgents and central state authorities, this causes many evacuations of poor people, and sometimes they never come back. Next, okay, so comments on observations on the availability and the quality of the data. So conflict data, there are different methods per agency, so it's up to the researchers to reconcile the data. There's no official data on landlessness. Data on informal settlers are only estimates. So it's very difficult to estimate this, but we need a better methodology. No census on forest dwellers. Local governments and civil society organizations lack access to updated and accurate data for policies and planning and advocacy. Sometimes CSOs do repeated requests for data, but this data is still difficult to come by. Now, some key recommendations. The NEDA and the Philippine Statistical Authority should work together to develop a consensus working definition of tenure security. for the different basic sectors and discuss how to produce accurate consolidated tenure security data. Actually, this is the most important point really. I think there needs to be a consensus and an understanding among different stakeholders on what tenure security means. No? So it means not just having a legal document to the land. It also means support services to make the land productive. It means elimination of threats to land, such as the threats we mentioned before. So it includes concepts of communal ownership. No? So this is there is a need to understand first the dimensions of tenure security, and then you can craft the ideal indicators to measure it. The next, NEDA and PCA in consultation with the PSA in consultation with the civil society must also discuss appropriateness and feasibility of implementing the methodology for producing data on 1.4.2, which Don was mentioning earlier, and as proposed by the Global Custodian Agency. So there's supposed to be a methodology already, but in the Philippines, it still has to be discussed. Then consider the implementation of a survey on perceptions of tenure security. As we mentioned before, this is something that's overlooked. CSOs may provide studies on this matter. No? Then improve implementation of the Freedom of Information Law. So in the Philippines, you have a Freedom of Information Law where you have the right to request documents that are not national security sensitive, and data for research such as this clearly falls under the Freedom of Information Law. Yet civil society has encountered continuous difficulties getting data from government on land. Then next, improve the timeliness, accessibility, local disaggregation of data repositories in the websites of government agencies. As we mentioned before, data here is very, very uneven, very difficult to access. The websites have various technical problems. So there are miscellaneous problems in accessing data on land. Then next, for NEDA and PSA to convene regular interagency meetings among the different land and resource agencies. And this includes the Department of Agriculture, Agrarian Reform, etc., to provide updates on data convergence and reconciliation. So thank you.
Thank you very much also, Sir Joel. And dear participants, you may chat your questions or comments in the chat box. And after the Southeast Asia plus Central Asia panel, we'll have a short question and answer. We were also supposed to have a presentation from Indonesia, but unfortunately, our partners from Binadesa had to attend to an emergency. Hence, we will now be skipping to the presentation from Cambodia. So may I call on Mr. Nek Serin. You have 7 minutes, and please listen for the chime if your time remaining is 1 minute. Thank you.
Thank you, Dennis, and good morning, everyone. I'm happy to present about the country methodology of the measuring and reporting SDG indicator 1.4.2. Yeah. Who is the institution to measure and report SDG indicator 1.4.2? That is the National Institute of the Statistics. NIST is the official statistics policy making body of the royal government of Cambodia with responsibility for the establishment and integrating the national statistic system, which cover all designated official statistics of ministries, government institutions, and their respective statistic units. Yeah, at the global level, as Don already mentioned, that 1.4.2 is defined as the proportion of total adult population with secure tenure rights to land, A, with legal recognized documentation, and B, who pursue their right to land as secure by sex and types of tenure. Unfortunately, this indicator has not yet been included in the Cambodian SDG, and there is no report or no data about the proportion adult population and with secure tenure right to land. Yeah, and regarding to the official data on SDG indicator 1.4.2, on legally recognized document, yeah, the data show that in 1989 until 2020, there are more than 6 million out of estimate 7 million plots have been titled, and it is equal to 8.80% of the total land plot. There were 33 indigenous community were registered and 556 communal land title with 33,899 hectares for 3,235 families are recognized. On gender disaggregation, based on the census conducted in 1919 by the National Institute of Statistics of the Ministry of Planning, there is no data on disaggregate by fact and type of tenure. Moreover, in 2010, report of the Ministry of Land Management, there is no disaggregate data on land title by fact. Regarding to the perception of tenure security, there is no data available on SDG indicator because of this indicator. This indicator is not included in the CSDG. However, in 2019, the Multidisciplinary Digital Public Institute conduct a survey on perception regarding access to land. The survey covered 20 villages. Result revealed that 62% of the 1,129 respondents disagree with the statement that their current land access was enough to meet their household needs. And 47 of the respondents state that their future access would not be enough. Regarding on legal recognized document, also CSO have no opportunity to validate the data from the government. This is because of lack of coordination between civil society and government. And also regarding the gender disaggregation, there is no gender disaggregated data available related to CSD 1.42. On perception of tenure security, there is no data. This is related to the availability of quality of data on SDG 1.4.2. And other common observation, civil society suggests that the government to add the indicator on 1.4.2 related to land in the Cambodia Sustainable Development Goal and in the voluntary national review. There are recommendations from civil society for the government to provide the fuller picture of the progress toward SDG target 1.4, especially regarding to the land security. The government should ensure that all men and women, in particular the poor and the vulnerable, have equal right to economic resource as well as access to basic services, ownership and control over land and other form of property, inheritance, natural resources, appropriate new technology and financial service, including microfinance. Strengthen the implementation of the law and create effective and responsive mechanism to protect land and natural resource. My last slide is that to strengthen the practice of EPIC and EIA as endorsed by UNDP, conduct inventory for public state land and the public-private land to avoid the abused state land, which can be classified as social economic land concession, that this policy can provide to the people who are landless with free. And also speed up the registration of systematic land registration, and also speed up the amendment of land law and environmental code. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much also, Sir Serene, and excellent timekeeping. You were right on the dot, 7 minutes. Now, without further delaying, may I now call on Mr. Tulos Boston Bayev to present the SDG report from Kyrgyzstan.
Yes, hi, good morning to everyone. My name is Tulos, and here we have Erkinbek Kojoyev. He's our chairman of National Users of National Association of Water Users. Denise, if you can please introduce, give us the. Please show us the presentation so I can present it here. Denise, can you hear us?
Yes. Can you see this? Oh, wait, sorry. Okay, can you see my screen now?
Yes, now we can see.
Okay. Wait, let me just share. All right.
So I will be the representative of this presentation. Unfortunately, our specialist, the Sairago, she couldn't join us. So the next slide, please. Here we have the methodologies of the measuring and reporting SDGs, indicator 1.4.2. The Constitution of the Kyrgyz Republic recognizes a variety of forms of ownership and guarantees equal legal protection of private, state, municipal, and other forms of ownerships. The Civil Code of the Kyrgyz Republic determines the real estate includes land plots, subsoil plots, isolated water bodies, forests, perennial plantations, building structures, everything that is firmly connected to the ground, that is objects, the movements of which is impossible without damage disproportional to their purpose. The next slide, please. The National Statistical Committee of the Kyrgyz Republic, within the framework of the implementation of the 2030 Agenda and the preparation of the National Voluntary Review of the SDGs, is the responsible body for the building and effective monitoring and reporting system for the achievement of the SDGs. On July 16, 2020, at the high-level political forum on sustainable development of the United Nations Economic and Social Council, the Kyrgyz Republic presented its first national voluntary review of the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. In the first national voluntary review of the SDGs, information on progress and lands, in particular target 1.4.2 SDGs, unfortunately not available. SDG indicator 1.4.2 is measured through a state administrative reporting form 22, which is on the availability of land in the Kyrgyz Republic and their distribution by categories: owners, land users, and land. Data gathered here, as you can see, which is number of land contour, full name of the owner, name of the land users, contours, categories of the land font, total area of land, including irrigated land, total area by form of ownership, arable lands irrigated or rain-fed, area of perennial fruit plantations, haymaking area, which is flooded, dry lands, waterlogged, and radical improvement. Pasture area, we have dry lands, swamp pea culture, and radical improvements in summertime, spring, autumn, and winter time. Household lands, gardens, vegetable gardens, lawn, flower beds, forest areas, and the arboreal and shrub plantation. Here you can see the official data available on the SDG indicator 1.4.2. We have 400,000 farms, which consists of the members of one family. The average farm which they have is usually up to 3 hectares. We have pasture communities, 456 association of pasture users, and we have more than 300,000 water users. There was water users here in our country, united and created 475 water user associations. And for the forest users, we have more than 1 million. They have formal lease agreement for about 29,000 people. And the commercial fishing shows a quantity of 80. There are several types of fishing, commercial fishing, and for the recreational and sport fishing, unfortunately, we don't have data. And the comments on the availability and quality of data of SDG 1.4.2. In the first national voluntary review of the SDG, information on progress on land rights, in particular in indicator 1.4.2 was not reported, unfortunately. But however, it is possible to collect for this indicator, since all the necessary data is available in the database of the Department of Cadastre and registration of right to real estate under the state registration service under the state registration service under the government of the Kyrgyz Republic and its regional divisions, as well as in the other relevant state bodies. We have proposals here. They regularly increase the legal capacity and awareness of civil society organizations and other stakeholders on the correct collection and processing of data information regarding the SDGs. When preparing the National Voluntary Survey, involve relevant civil society organizations. For example, the National Association of Pasture Users can be involved in collecting information on pasture users. The Association of Forest and Land Users can be involved in collecting data on forest users, and water users, association for collecting information on water, and so on. In preparing the next voluntary survey, include information on SDG indicator 1.4.2. Other proposals, which is research, provision of information. Cso often conduct various types of research and surveys that they need to carry out project activities. The result of such studies quite often turn out to be very useful for the government agencies as a source of alternative information. cooperation with international institutions. Women's civil society organizations have successfully experienced in preparing both government and alternative reports on the implementation of the UN Convention on the elimination of all forms of discrimination against women, which are successfully presented at international forums using international institutions. CSO have a real opportunity to lobby for their interests. Amend the civil and land codes of the Kyrgyz Republic and the law of the Kyrgyz Republic on the management of agricultural lands to eliminate discrimination against women in divorce and inheritance of land share. For example, provide an alternative mechanism such as payment of life annuity on the woman's share in the land share. You can go for the next slide, Denise. Yeah, and you can see here, determine the procedure for the seizure of land plots and other real estate for state, public, and municipal needs by adopting a special regulatory legal act at the legislative level. Provide in the legislation an effective and simplified mechanism for registering land leases. Amend the legislation that owners of the land user must have the right without restrictions, the right to use, own, and dispose of land, freely sell or buy, give and bequeath by inheritance, take loans secured by land. At the level of national policy, decide on the adoption of effective and fair regulation of the issue of unauthorized seizure of land for individual housing constructions. Create an open and accessible electronic databases taking into account the gender, social status, age, and other parameters of land users and landowners. Strengthen an implementation of national legislation in the field of observance and protection of legal rights of tenure and use of land, fishery, and forest resources in the context of national food security. Oh yeah, that is all from Kyrgyzstan. Thank you for your attention.
Yes, thank you also, Sir Tulos and Sir Erkinbeck for that presentation. Now we have time for some question and answer. So given that we are on a strict schedule, we have time to accommodate 3 questions for the presentations from the Philippines, Cambodia, and Kyrgyzstan. So presently, we have 1 question in the chat by Pirawan, and the question, well, he has 2 questions. The questions are, what is the percentage of state land and private land of each country? And within the private land, how many % are owned by farmers / indigenous peoples? Sir Serene, Sir Joel, Sir Tulos, Sir Erkinbeck, you may provide your responses. And I also encourage other participants who are from these countries to also contribute to the discussion in the chat. So who would want to take the question first? Are there any other questions? Going once, twice? All right, none so far. All right, so we have just these 2 questions for now. Who would want to answer first? May I call on Sir Serene, Sir Joel, and Sir Tulos?
Oh yeah, for the first question.
Она была передана частной собственности, 75%. Но потом где-то еще 3%, сейчас 78% она находится в частном собственности. Основное это государственный фонд.
as per Erkin Bek, he's saying that up to 78% of land is private now, and the rest is belongs to the government. And,
Thank you, sir. Yes, please continue.
Sorry, let me translate the question. Emily, 70% частной землянын канчасы принадлежит фермерам?
На все полностью передано частной собственности.
So all these private lands for the 78%, most of them are farmers. And these lands are like 78%. It says that. So it's approximately 78% of lands are owned by the farmers, and these lands will be with the farmers forever until they will sell it.
Thank you. Thank you for responding to the question, Sir Erkinbeck and Sir Tulos. May we now hear from Sir Sarin and or Sir Joel?
Thank you very much, Dennis, and thank you for the question. Actually, I don't have this data on hand, but I think that more than 80% of the land that held by the farmers and 20% are the state land. But I don't have data on hand now. Yep. This is just my individual perception. Yep. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Sir Sarin. Perhaps while we are in this session, and maybe if later you will be able to find the data, you may also provide information in the chat. Sir Joel?
Yes, Denise, thank you. Yeah, this question is actually outside the scope of the presentation. We can do the background research necessary to answer this question and get back to who's this Pirawan. We can do the background research. The other problem with the Philippines is we already mentioned that there's inconsistent land data across agencies, and in fact, one interesting development is that the target of the Department of Agrarian Reform for land reform actually keeps changing, and the achievement has sometimes exceeds the actual land target. So there are many inconsistencies with the data. And then you have the problem of overlapping claims, so which also complicates the picture. But we can come back to Pirawan with our best estimates. I think Anglo has already done previous studies on that. We can come back to Pirawan with our best estimates given the limitations of the data. Thank you.
Thank you, Sir Joel. And yes, I also encourage everyone from the three countries to, if you have additional information, to also participate in the discussion by providing your feedback in the chat. And from Sir Anthony Marzan from the Philippines, we have something. He says, 59% of the agrarian reform covered lands are private agricultural lands. And privately, I also have a message from Sir Tony saying that around 49% of the Philippines lands are claimed forest lands, but this includes indigenous people's lands. So I cannot do the math right now, but there are 30 million hectares approximately of land in the Philippines, and 5 million of those are indigenous people's lands, and that's not the whole picture. Those are just those with recognized tenure with an instrument. So are there any more questions for the three countries, or should we move to the next part of our discussion? Oh, and Pirawan says, thank you very much, because in Thailand, almost 54% is owned by the state, and 80% of private land is owned by elite people. Okay, and there is another question, and perhaps this could be our last question before we move to the South Asia panel. Is there any data under the state land but belong to indigenous peoples, or we called it native customary rights land in many years before the land is registered under the state land? So if my understanding is correct, he is asking about state land that is actually indigenous people's land. Was my understanding correct? Please correct me if I'm wrong. And okay, so would any of our speakers want to respond first? So in your countries, are there state land that is considered as state land but is actually owned by indigenous peoples?
Yes, I would like to answer first. Yes, the state land, yes, is owned by the indigenous people, but they have to register community land titling. If they don't register, they cannot manage. And because of community land titling, recognize the spiritual land, buried land, and agricultural land. So the government give this land to the indigenous people. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sir Salim. How about Sir Erkinbeck or Sir Joel?
For the Kyrgyzstan, we don't have this term like indigenous people. So in 1994 and 1996 we had a land reform. So the government all the lands for the farmers, for each and every single people.
Ano nangyari? Nahila ba yung...
And in 1999 we had the land codex, and so each and every single person in 1994 who had lands from the government has already the legal certificate for the land. So this is why we have like a lot of big percentage of people who has land in Kyrgyzstan, and very less for the state, for the government.
Thank you for that context-rich explanation, Sir Tulos and Sir Erkinbeck. Sir Joel, for the Philippines?
Yes, Denise, Don has already answered the question in the chat box. As of December 2020, a total of 247 ancestral domain titles have been approved by the IP Commission, covering a total area of 5,741,389 hectares of ancestral lands and waters, benefiting 1,326,332 individuals. So all we can add, of course, the question between state land and indigenous people's land is ongoing conflict of different land uses. Some land uses of which in indigenous people's lands are sponsored by the state. So there are various challenges to continuing to enforce indigenous people's rights, even though we have an Indigenous People's Rights Act, and the challenge also is registration in the Land Registration Authority to finalize indigenous people's land claims. Thank you.
Thank you, Sir Joel. And I think the context is the same for other countries. Whenever there are shared resources such as forests, it's always a question of who has the final say over this land, the people who are benefiting from the land, the indigenous peoples who are there, or the state who claim that these are public lands and therefore under their domain. So thank you for participating, everyone, during that part of our session. We now move to the South Asia panel. We have 3 presenters. First, we will hear from Nepal, and then India, and then Bangladesh. So for Nepal, may I now call Sir Dharm Joshi to start with his presentation.
Thank you, Denise. Good morning and good day to all the participants present here. From Nepal, I will present on 2020 Cso report on SDG 1.4.2. Okay, my internet is not working properly, but yeah, countries, about the country's methodology that was applied on measuring and reporting SDG indicator 1.4.2. Government has slightly modified the indicators, as you can see in the letters written in the red color. Our government is using these indicators as a share of bottom quintile in national consumption in percentage, and household having property, tangible assets in women's name, percent of total. So with these two indicators, government is trying to get proportion of total adult population with secure tenure rights to land. And so far, concerning to these indicators, current status of the accomplishment as of 2019 is that the government has met its target, which was set 8.4 for the share of the bottom quintile in national consumption. So which is slightly above the target of 8.8, that is 12.05%. And similarly on the households with assets, the target set for 2019 was 25.1, while it is while the percentage is well above that is 33.9%, where these 33.9% women have ownership over assets like land and house. So our comment for this methodology is that the scores reported could not provide the basis to measure the progress towards the secure tenure rights to land of adults. As you see, the indicator is, the global indicator is asking different thing, and our government is reporting slightly different thing. About the availability of the related data, data on legally recognized documentation is available for 75% of land, and the remaining 25% land is under unregistered or informal land tenures. So these data come through the Department of Land Management and Archive at national level, while at the local level, land reform and revenue offices provide this kind of data. So far, total landowners we have are 11,076,422, where these owners own total of 35,065,092 plots. So almost one owner is owning 3 plots. Similarly, the 1.8 million 87,900 households own less than 0.5 hectare. This household makes around 53% of total household. And indigenous land are not officially registered, therefore they are not recognized. So we don't have this data. And about the gender disaggregated data, 16% of land is under joint land ownership. This is registered under both husband and wife. And as I already mentioned, 33.9% women have ownership over assets, in both that include land and house. About the perception related data on tenure security, government itself does not collect such type of data. Ultimately, the surveys like national surveys like population surveys and agricultural surveys that are periodically conducted in the period of 10 years, those are ultimately we can consider a kind of perception, but those data do not capture the perception of tenure security. So last year Pre-index conducted a sample survey that included 1,000 samples. So that included 430 men and 570 women. So out of them, 96% of rural men and women have some kind of documentation to show that the particular land belongs to them. But out of them, only 82% of them perceive that their land tenure is secure. About the availability and quality of the data related to SDG 1.4.2, on the legally recognized documentation, information is collected, but not well managed at a national level down to the local level. Therefore, it is very difficult to find out up-to-date data. About the gender disaggregation of data, that is not available by land types, ethnicity, and tenure types. Meanwhile, Central Bureau of Statistics provides gender disaggregated data for land and house. This type of data can be found with land reform and revenue offices and survey offices at local levels, which are not well incorporated or maintained at the national dataset. So it is not so easy to access. On perception of tenure security, as I mentioned already, government does not collect data on perception of tenure security, and our observation of the data availability and quality regarding SDG 1.4.2 is that SDG 1.4.2 indicators are different at national level, so there is a need for their exact incorporation at the national level. We have drawn a couple of recommendations for the government to incorporate to address the issues I mentioned earlier. And the recommendations are, we recommend government to take informal and customary rights to land into account to ensure tenure security of all, thus contributing to the constitutional commitment as well. Conduct a comprehensive impact study of the pro-poor and pro-gender land policies in Nepal. If you look at the development in the policy level during last 5 or 6 years, we found the prolific changes in land-related policies. But on the ground, implementation, what we sense is implementation is lacking. So there is a need of in-depth impact study as well. The government does not have data to rely on for a robust prediction given the huge data gap. Local governments can start working on gathering data, systematically disaggregating by sex, land type, tenure types, and caste, because government, the Constitution of Federal Nepal provides rights to the local level to maintain data sets. The policy landscape has drastically changed, as I mentioned earlier, in the last decade, but estimated 1.4 million people remain with insecure land rights. If you look at the scenario created by the untimely flood that we encountered in last few weeks in Nepal, that might have pushed many more families in the landlessness also. So this data might increase in the days to come. Therefore, government needs to address the issue of landlessness and informality, speeding up the work of National Land Commission that is currently working, and itself it is being completely having the person on board. So remaining recommendations are the management and governance responsibility and authorities related to land resource are distributed among different ministries of the government. So the interministerial and also interdepartmental coordination needs to be enhanced. There is a need to incorporate the relevant questionnaires in the national surveys as well, so that the government need not to conduct such surveys to collect related data time and again. And we also recommend the government to revisit the indicators so that it can align them with the global indicators, and we will be then able to provide globally comparable data. Thank you so much, Dinesh.
Thank you also very much, Sir Dharm, for that presentation. Immediately moving forward, may I now call on from India, Sir Barna Baibad Panda for his presentation. And to everyone, please put your comments or questions in the chat so that we may address them later.
Hello, good morning, everyone. Am I audible?
Yes.
Thanks, Dennis, for this opportunity. So I'm presenting Cso report from India on SDG 1.4.2 indicators. Next slide, please. Yeah. Before getting into the data and the findings thereof, I would make certain basic statements about land governance regimes in India. As you may be knowing, land is a state subject in India. State subject meaning it is listed in the, there are two lists. One is the union list and then the state list. So laws to land are made by the state legislatures, not the central legislature here. Hence, there are multiple tenure regimes depending on the legacy history of that particular state. There are some areas which were ruled by the British, some areas which were ruled by the princes and kings. So depending on the legacy, the legal frameworks vary, and depending also on geography, the ground situations vary. So that in the forested areas where indigenous people inhabit, there are large areas which are never surveyed, yet there are human habitations, there are cultivable lands which are actually cultivated. Those were never surveyed and recorded. As others pointed out, we do have also what is called individual holdings and common holdings. Here, there is nothing called common holdings. These are all recorded as government lands. Unlike in Philippines, someone is James mentioning about Philippines ancestral domains. We didn't have that kind of a regime earlier. Only with the Forest Rights Act of 2006, community land rights were recognized over forest lands. On ground, there are major differences in actual possessions, records in government offices, and maps that are available in revenue department. So this differences in actual textual and spatial data makes it very difficult to collect data on the SDG indicators, especially 1.4.2. Government of India a decade back launched something called Land Records Modernization Program. That is primarily enabled new transactions involving lands to be recorded online. The old transactions are not recorded in this entire program. Some digitization has happened, but I'll come to that on what is the current position. COVID-19 has changed land relations on ground between, say, the landlords and the tenants. We have a huge huge number of tenants who are not the owners yet cultivate their lands and say on a particular rent. That rent will be in cash or in kind. Coming to the methodology of measuring and reporting SDG indicators, for SDG, NITI Aayog at the central level, which is the policy planning body, is the agency which reports, which is the nodal agency for reporting. So far as land is at the central level, Department of Land Resources, housed within the Ministry of Agriculture, they are responsible for data relating to land records, relating to land. So for the purposes of this study, secondary data was collected from the National Sample Survey Organization, from the reports of the Department of Land Resources, economic surveys brought out by the central government and the state governments, and the districts where we did some in-depth study, district statistical handbooks were referred. We have state land portals called in the state of Odisha, where I reside, that is called Buleg. They similarly were under different names. The state land portals exist. We did collect, apart from scanning the secondary data, we did collect primary data from 2 states, 6 districts, and involving 6 partner NGOs. I would put a rider, a qualifier here, and the samples in terms of districts, in terms of villages, were convenient samples, depending on the availability and willingness of the partner NGOs. Initially, we started with 3 states. After triangulating the data, and there were some major discrepancies in one state, we decided to limit it to 2 states of Eastern India, which has 22% of at least 22% of the tribal population. Tribal meaning indigenous people in India. And there are 3 tribal subplans. This is a kind of a focused program of Government of India, which assists these districts in creating infrastructure and other assistance for welfare and development. So to get more data, we did look at the consultations with different stakeholders. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. On legally recognized documentation, I have already mentioned about where the data was collected. Coming to the findings, reflections, 92% of the lands in these villages and in these 2 states have some form of legally recognized documentation. 87.8% of the cadastral maps, these are maps of all India basis, these are uploaded in the websites and available online. 71% of the ground truthing samples in these 2 states showed variation in actual and textual records. In case of land settled under Forest Rights Act, 41% of the title holders have received record of rights. Correction is done in government records. In case of community land rights, only 7% record of rights have been corrected. We have a special category of land called Budan lands, which were gifted by landlords earlier in the 1970s and 80s. So they were not distributed yet. They still remain within the government's control. Next, please. On gender disaggregation, the data is very, very sketchy. There are some government orders recently in the first few years in different states for providing gender disaggregated data, but for providing this is nowhere collected at the what we call the basic unit, tehsil level. Since this is not collected at the basic unit level, it is never aggregated at the state and the central level. So, but certain states have introduced a provision called stamp duty for registration. The government collects the duty for registration. So there are incentives if you register in the name of women. 34% of the forest rights titles have names of women entered as title holder. Next, please. Tenure security, as other speakers have mentioned, this data is not collected by the government, perception data. But when we talk to the people in the sample states and in the sample districts, when it comes to the individual and land holdings, agricultural land holdings, 98% say it's okay, we don't feel any threat. But when it comes to the common lands, very few, only 11% said that we feel secure. It might be taken over by government, other agencies, by the companies, for various authorities, for industrialization, urbanization, they can be taken by. In terms of grazing lands, this is though a common land, but all states have a provision, so that's why people feel more secure about grazing lands. There are religious lands, that is where there is so the people less secure, feel less secure, that can be taken over by other authorities. Next, please. In terms of land category, this in terms of communities, transgenders and Dalits, this who are called scheduled castes, have the lowest perception of security. Tribals in forest areas have highest perception of security in terms of individual holdings, except for one displaced community, which were displaced because of a dam. Not major difference between men and women that was found during the study. In case of common lands, as I mentioned in the previous slide, that security of tenure is something, is a major issue in the minds of the people who did talk about it. In the last 1 year, because we reported say 1.5 years back, there are certain major changes that have come up. National Council of Applied Economic Research has introduced something called Land Records and Services Index for the citizens. So this report has helped states and incentivized states to improvise their land governance regimes. 10 states now have automatic generation of record of rights with when a transaction is done. States are now most of the states are making cadastral maps available, which you can really find plot boundaries and details of the plots that is being transacted. Large scale survey of survey and mapping of the lands have been introduced in certain districts of India under a new scheme launched by the Prime Minister of India last year called Swamitto. Please. On comments, observations, and availability and access to data, the major problem is about multiple agencies, both at the state and central level. At the central level, it is just aggregation of data, nothing new that comes off. Multiple agencies, no single window. Data at the state level are dated, they are never updated. You will get data even today in certain sites, you'll find data for only 2014. Okay, land records modernization is very slow. Survey and settlement process is not done in tribal areas. That's it. Next, please. State portals and land records should be comprehensive and should record all categories of land. Department of Land Resources should set a timeline for completion of digitization of land records. Niti Aayog currently doesn't report gender segregated data by state. So there is very sketchy data available there. That's some of the recommendations. Major recommendations are operational recommendations for the state governments, not on keeping upkeep of data at the central level. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sir Boo Boo. Now heading straight to the last presentation. May I call on Sir Bulbul, and please stick to the time as we do not want to deprive people of their right to food. Please take the floor, Sir Bulbul.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Dennis. And thank you. And greetings to all the participants here. So I will request Sir Don if he can share the presentation I shared, or otherwise I can. Thank you, Sir Don. Okay, so I will just focus on how data is gathered and reported from government side to on SDG target 1.4 and more particularly on SDG indicator 1.4.2. So the country's methodology of measuring and reporting SDG indicator 1.4.2. I am going very specific because given the time, I will try to finish within my given time. So official land data gathered and reported by BBS and other parties, the VNR report, which is prepared by the GED. And what BBS has done that no exclusive census or surveys on land tenure, access and rights and other land related issues. It produced some particular partial discrete land data through official census and surveys. For example, we are having agricultural census. We got the preliminary report of it, but not the full report. And we are having a population survey ahead, which is population census 2021 ahead. So hopefully by this full report of this census, we will get some more. On legally recognized documentation, as based on the SDG indicator 1.4.2, we found no specific data available for small farmers. And according to that preliminary report, as I mentioned, agricultural census 2009, out of 355 million households in the country, 11.3 and 11.33% households do not have any land, any kind of land. And we found that 68.63% of households having agricultural land possess legal documents of their land. So that is all we have found, and we found no official data for indigenous people, no specific data available for small fishers, legal recognized documentation, and also no available official data for gender disaggregation and the perception of tenure security. And on legally recognized documentation, we have these 4 comments. That is, one is the no specific official data available for legally recognized documentation for any categories, whatever it is, for small farmers, indigenous peoples, and small fishers. Also, but we unlike other presentations, I saw that we have landlessness data on landlessness, and also the data on tenant households, including the share purpose, which are available through that agricultural census preliminary report. So we are hoping that we will get more detail on the full report. No specific measures for collecting exclusive data on access to land and tenure security, as I mentioned. So there is 2 VNR reports, but that 2 VNR reports are completely silent about this tenure security related data and findings. So on gender disaggregation, no official data available, as I mentioned, and perception of tenure security, currently no official data perception. Some of the factors that may affect perception of tenure security include occurrence of land and resource conflict, overlapping claims, impact of climate change and natural disasters, and issues of peace and order. Next, please. Thank you. Other comments and observations, that is, as I mentioned, no data on land conflicts, because we are having vast of land conflicts and that land conflicts affects on land tenure, but no government, no public data on land conflicts. No census on forest dwellers. So forest dwellers are missing in the census reports. No data on natural disasters affected land tenure. For example, there is no data on how much land is eroded by rivers, how much land is affected by saline intrusion. So, and also there is similarly no climate change induced migrant families data, and also no data on socially excluded communities like Dalits, Harijan, Pede, Isra, I mean the gender, transgender. No survey on people's perception of on land tenure. So how people perceived land tenure, that is also missing. And official data does not include data from academia or CSOs. So our recommendations is for government is for more truthful and accurate report on land tenure security, the official report should contain information on women's land ownership, information on land ownership of indigenous people, including forest land use, access to public land, and segregated, not religious, but ethnic specific land data. We always see that government has a tendency to segregate the land data according to the religious identity. But other than that, we think more appropriate would be the ethnic specific land data. The information on land ownership and receipt of caste land settlement of other minority households, like that should be on the religion identity. And data on receipt of caste land settlement and statistics of actual possession. That is very important, that how many families are retaining on their lands that has been distributed among them. And segregated land data on land disputes. That is also very important. And data on affected land tenure by natural or the climate change disasters. Next, please. Okay, so to conclude,
CST นี่มันเป็นที่ดินของพี่น้องชนเผ่าคือหมายถึงว่าเป็นที่อยู่อาศัยของพี่น้องชนเผ่าในบางรัฐเจ้า
Okay, no, I think the sounds are coming from another person. Okay, for concluding with the recommendations, we have 4 recommendations. That first one is the CSOs, the General Economic Division of Planning Commission, the Bureau of Statistics should work together to develop a consensus working definition on tenure security for different basic sectors and discuss how to produce accurate nationally consolidated tenure security data. Because as we see that tenure security is more vague in that report government are producing. And the second one is improve the implementation of the Right to Information Act so that we can have that access to government data. And also for accessing to the government data and improve the timeliness, accessible local disaggregation of data repositories in the websites of government agencies. That should be updated and that should be more accessible. For GED and BBS to undertake a specific action based on a concrete action plan for gathering specific data and reporting on SDG target 1.4.2 and target 1.4 and indicator 1.1.2. That should be included consensus building coordination among the ministry and agencies. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sir Bulbul. And that wraps up our presentations for today. Now, time check, it is already 12:10 in Bangkok and in Jakarta. So I am proposing that if there are questions for the presenters, may you please just chat in the chat box, and our presenters, may you please just answer the questions in the chat in the interest of time, so that we can proceed without going too much, without spending too much time. So would that be okay for everyone, or would that be too much? Is that proposal okay for everyone? Can we just answer the questions in the chat, via chat? Yes? No? Okay, is it okay for our speakers? Sir Darm, Sir Bubu, and Sir Bulbul? Sorry?
No? Should I answer or in chat box?
Yeah, so I am proposing to, because we have a lot of questions now in the chat box, but in the interest of time, because we were only allotted until 12 p.m. in Jakarta, may we just proceed with the question and answer through the chat, and then we can proceed with the reactors here in the panel discussion. Would that be okay?
Okay, I'm answering in the chat box. The questions that.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much, everyone. And yes, so we have several questions here in the chat box. I am asking our panelists to please respond to these questions. And there's also one general question for everyone. And I think participants can also provide their feedback on this. Okay, sorry, please. Please, let's try to minimize background noise. So the general question is, how can Indigenous peoples' cooperation in Asia be built to ensure secure access to land rights for Indigenous peoples? And this is perhaps something that we can continue to think of as we go on with the Asia Land Forum, but everyone can provide their feedback in the chat. So thank you for all those presentations. We now move to reactions from selected panelists. We have two reactors for today. The first reactor is from the Global Land Indicators Initiative, and he has sent his feedback via video. So he will be speaking on what regional actions we can take at the regional level to pursue reporting on land rights and to pursue land rights in the SDGs. So this is Sir Robert Louis Lettington.
Good morning. First, I would like to offer my thanks to ILC and its partners for organizing the Asia Land Forum. Despite being the basis of life, culture, and economies, land is poorly served at the international level. Forums like this and the solutions, partnerships, and momentum that they generate take us a step closer to genuinely leaving no one behind through ensuring that every person has adequate access to and use of land. I would also like to thank Angok and Landwatch Asia for inviting me to comment on behalf of the Secretariat of the Global Land Tool Network and the Global Land Indicators Initiative. For us, and I am sure for all of you participating in this session today, evidence-based land policy is essential. What we are all too often seeing and feeling is that the achievement of land tenure security for all remains an elusive goal. The inclusion of land tenure security in the SDGs was an achievement, but it is an achievement that will ultimately only be meaningful if we are able to use it to change the facts in people's daily lives. The title of this session asks, are we on the right track? If we interpret this to ask if the world is on the right track to achieving land tenure security for all, then I am afraid that the answer is no. To do that, we need governments to act. For governments to act, or at least for them to act at the scale and in the manner required, we must continue to present them with clear evidence both of the need for land tenure security and of the fact that we have a long way to go before reaching our goal. This is a very timely initiative, particularly in this UN Decade of Action that calls on all sectors of society to, among other things, strengthen partnerships for enhanced data generation to support a sustainable future for all. We must have the best information possible on the world's biggest challenges, including poverty, gender, and inequality, all of which have a significant reliance on land governance and tenure security. Your work increases the quantity of information, but also the quality. The best solutions come from a diversity of views, experiences, and understandings. You are bringing that to the table. It is laudable that your initiative goes beyond the issues addressed in SDG Target 1.4 and Indicator 1.4.2 and captures other important issues in land data generation, such as the ethical aspects of transparency and openness and the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on land rights and land rights monitoring. For our part, GLTN and GLI will continue to join hands with you to deliver capacity building and awareness raising for national statistical offices, ministries, and governments at all levels. We will also do our best to support and amplify the efforts of ILC and its partners to advocate for land rights and good land governance. Further, we will seek to bring your efforts and objectives to the attention of forums beyond the SDGs. For example, land is an essential element for the achievement of a number of human rights, but it is not nearly well enough recognized in the Universal Periodic Review process. That process includes a clear role for CSOs that is strengthening with time, and information generated in response to Indicator 1.4.2 will be vital there too. Forgive me for closing by returning to the title of this session. Are we on the right track? If we interpret this to ask instead if CSOs are on the right track in seeking to drive the process of monitoring SDG Indicator 1.4.2 forward, and more importantly, use that to increase the priority that member states attach to achieving land tenure security, then my answer is very definitely yes, and thank you for your efforts. Thank you again to the organizers and the hosts of today's session. We look forward to continuing our work with you. Goodbye.
Thank you to Sir Robert Louis Lettington for ending on a hopeful and positive note. Now we have one more reactor for this morning, and he is from the ILC Secretariat actually, but he will be representing the SDG Land Momentum Group, and we are all very thankful because we know that time difference and time zones are very tricky, and it's very early where he is from. But he was able to join even in our opening session earlier. So we're very thankful for him. May I now call on Mr. Rukshana Nanayakara to provide his reflections.
Thank you very much, Janice. Very kind of you for that introduction. So what I'm going to say is, on behalf of the SDG Land Momentum Group, I just want to applaud the efforts done by the ANGOC and all the partners, and congratulations to them. And this is a huge amount of work, and we do understand the amount of work which involves in this kind of work. So congratulations and well done again. So as I said, I will speak on behalf of the SDG Land Momentum Group. And if any one of you doesn't know what the SDG Land Momentum Group is, it is a coalition of international and regional organizations, largely consisted of civil society organizations. We also do have one multilateral organization with us. I'll tell you in the process what we are doing, but very briefly in my brief remarks. As I said, it's extremely encouraging, and it's also very relevant to see this initiative and the outcome of it. So SDG Land Momentum Group is organized to make sure that land issues are prominently placed within the 2030 development agenda. And also land targets are reaching its end goals, the outcome. So particularly looking at the second objective that I mentioned, the land targets are reaching its intended outcome. So we consider, we conduct research to see how every year VNR reporting countries report on land, identified number of land targets. And also we encourage CSOs to report despite the status of reporting by governments. So, and I think in this regard, this work is extremely important for the advocacy for the SDG Land Momentum Group and beyond. So how SDG land momentum groups can use this for advocacy? In 2020, VNR research that land momentum group conducted, we realized that out of 42 countries that we researched, there were 47 countries reported at the high-level political forum. Due to language issues, we look at 42 countries. And out of that 42 countries, only 7 countries reported on land targets. And that reporting was also partial. It is interesting to note that other than Nepal, none of the other countries reported specifically on the indicators. Of course, out of these countries that you have mentioned, Bangladesh in its VNR did report on land issues, but they did not focus on any of the indicators or progress of indicators specifically. So finding of this report is extremely timely. What we saw here was researching into SDG indicator 1.4.2, but if you look at the LMG group's effort, we go beyond a little bit the goal number 1. We also look at 2.3, which is ownership of agricultural land, and also gender parity goal, which is 5A and 5A.1, women's ownership of land, which is partially covered through your research as well. And also we look into land degradation, how countries report on land degradation under 15.3, which is also important in today's discussion, particularly in the context of climate action. So winding up my observations, in the Asia region, it would be great to see implementation of this study on VNR countries in each year. I just want to invite Angok to think about this more, and we do understand this is extremely resource intensive endeavor. But nevertheless, if you look at the 2022 VNR countries, the list will be out very soon. It would be great at least this methodology to be implemented in some of those countries, so we will have enough information ready before the HLPF. And that would be extremely valuable for us to conduct related advocacy in July 2022. So I look forward to liaise with the Angok on behalf of the Land Momentum Group in the coming days to discuss what attention that we gather to the findings of this report internationally, because it's extremely valuable. And also we need to particularly get attention of key stakeholders, because this is more so important given the importance of land tenure security and land rights at large for women, men, indigenous peoples, local communities, and others to achieve the 2030 agenda. We clearly see that there is underreporting on land targets. We have less than a decade to achieve these, achieve the development agenda. So what can we do to encourage state parties to report? And also, in the absence of state party reports, even if state party reports, how can we encourage civil society organizations to report? I think for that, we need to bring the centrality of land to the 2030 development agenda, because without land, we cannot achieve eradicating poverty, zero hunger, gender parity, climate change, and also some of the targets mentioned in SDG goal 16. So I'm going to stop at that point. Thank you for this opportunity. And also I want to congratulate Angok again and all the partners involved in conducting this research. And I look forward to working with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sir Rukhsana, for affirming the importance of the work that we're all here together to do, and also mentioning some recommendations to continue the work. So as is always with our advocacies, a lot has already been done, but a lot more can still be pursued. Thank you very much also for bringing us back to the point of how central land is in the 2030 agenda. Land was largely disregarded in the MDGs, but now we have land in a lot of the SDGs, and really this provides us with a lot of engagement points. Now, may I call on to provide the closing and the next steps, how we may work further together, other things that we may pursue as a coalition. May I call to the floor Sir Don Marquez.
Thank you, Denise, and thank you, Rukhsana. I think, and thank you to all the participants. We've gone over time, but yeah, we cannot avoid in this kind of modality of having such forum. Anyway, first of all, we will have a formal launch of the publication and we'll send the invitation to all. Second, we welcome further opportunities to explore, for example, with ILC and the SDG Land Momentum Group and the Global Land Indicators Initiative, to further disseminate the reports prepared by the countries and use them for further dialogue with their land agencies, the national statistical offices, and other stakeholders. The SDG 1, and in particular 1.4, it offers an opportunity to pursue security of land rights. However, SDGs alone will not lead to any major shifts in land policy and governance without the pressure from citizens and civil society organizations. Currently, the discussions at the global level in relation to SDG 1.4.2 is within the domain of the custodian agencies and national statistical offices, and therefore we need to break that cycle and have the voice of communities and civil society organizations to further the debate and discussion of tenure rights and tenure security. With that, again, I would like to thank the Landwatch Asia country partners, focal points who have undertaken the country Cso report on SDG 1.4.2, ILC for the support in this process, and again, and finally, we'll keep you in touch in terms of when the formal launch of this regional publication. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much once again to everyone. And that brings us to the close of this session. We now have about an hour to go grab some food, to fulfill our right to food. And I think we will come back at 1:30 Bangkok/Jakarta time. Correct, Andita? Or is it still 1:30?
Yes, Denise.
All right, so you may leave your Zoom screens open as there will be some presentations and videos that will be shown. And please enjoy your lunch, enjoy your coffee or tea, and we will see you back in an hour. Thank you, everyone. Happy lunch.
Thank you. Yeah.